Hey everybody, Jordan Tenenbaum here, host of Celigo's Technology Leadership Podcast. We have Roger Deetz, the Vice President of Engineering at Blueprint, as our guest today. And as always, Mark Simon, the Vice President of Strategy at Celigo, is my co-host. Roger, welcome to Celigo's podcast.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me, and lovely to be here.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I figured we could start out with something that I'm sure you've talked a little bit about before, but our listeners are keen to hear about. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a vice president of engineering? How'd you get to where you are, and what do you do?
Yeah, sure. So I've spent my entire career in software. I graduated from IU's business school, but my first job was in tech support, manning the phones at a software company called Install Shield. If you remember the Install Shield wizard from back in the day, and then. I ended up becoming a developer at that company. And so I spent the first, definitely third, maybe half of my career as a day-to-day engineer, just writing code. And I always kind of tended to be a little bit more on the front end side, kind of user interface design, kind of bridging the gap between, the engineering efforts and like the product design efforts. And then kind of midway through my career, I had a few more kind of architecture level roles. So I worked at a company that was responsible for a product that did like real-time disaster recovery replication, and so that was kind of my first foray into managing systems at a higher level. I still wrote code in that role, but was a little bit more of an architect, and kind of that's where I kind of started to get the itch to be in a little bit more of an active leadership role. And then after that job, I joined Angie's List, which is a nationwide, B2C brand. And then I joined that company as an architect, and over time moved into kind of my first like proper management role there. And then it kind of, I kind of found my calling, and I kind of felt like it was a good fit for me in terms of the things that I thought I was good at, and the things I thought were valuable to the company. And so I kind of, continued with the management track there and ended up being, the VP of engineering over there. And then the last handful of roles that I've had have all been in various, director, VP, engineering leadership kind of roles. So, yeah.
That's awesome, man. That's very cool to hear. And congrats on working all the way up to a vice president role. That's always exciting. And with that role comes a lot of responsibility.
Jordan, I'd love to ask Roger a question here. Roger, on that, I've known a lot of engineers in my career that have aspired to become technology leaders. And typically it's similar progression where they move into management. But I've also seen a lot kind of venture into there, and it doesn't work out very well.
Sure.
And I'm curious to hear, because it was successful for you. What do you think is the key to being successfully navigating that transition, really, for someone that's day-to-day hands-on subject matter expert to kind of switching over?
Yeah, sure. So the way I kind of think about it is that, like, just like in software, there's different like levels of abstraction of the business, the organization, et cetera, and so I think it really just depends on how comfortable you are with navigating a new level of abstraction, because when you move into a management role, especially an engineering management role, your job is now to achieve results through others. Your job is not to do it all yourself, and your job is also to bridge the gap between, what the business is trying to do or what the organization is trying to do, and like what, the folks that are on your team, can provide. And so, there's absolutely nothing wrong with a great, long, detailed career in being an individual contributor, being a very highly technical person, and writing code day in and day out. I mean, that's a very rewarding career path as well. But if you want to be successful in management, it requires kind of setting some of those details aside and then focusing on other details, which are going to be more related to, how are the people on my team doing? Is the thing that we're delivering actually valuable to the business, regardless of like what the technology is behind it, or regardless of, how elegant it is, And so if you're comfortable and if you're motivated by those challenges of like, organizing other people to do stuff that, is valuable elsewhere, it can be successful. But again, there's nothing wrong if you really love tech and you really love to, be in day out with the latest technology development. That there's also obviously those of us that are in management need the folks that really care deeply about that to do their jobs really well too. So
exactly, that's great. That's great perspective. Thank you.
So with that type of responsibility, you're managing a lot of people, you're building a lot of interesting, well, I guess a very interesting product or platform at Blueprint. For those listening, could you tell us a little bit about what Blueprint does and what problems you solve on behalf of your customers?
Yeah, sure. So we build tools, digital tools for mental health providers, and there's really no more important work I think that's being done in our society right now than what mental health providers are doing, and they haven't really benefited from just a lot of really great tools, and they're already overworked and they've already got tremendous challenges in their jobs, and they deserve great tools. And so, that's what our Blueprint, the mission of Blueprint is to make sure that, as many people as possible get access to high quality mental health care. And we believe the way to do that is to build great tools for mental health providers so they can do their job even better.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And so makes me think, I have a couple friends who are social workers, and they deal primarily with mental health, and they are incredibly ill-equipped, and not only in terms of like training and things like that, but also software and like lack of a platform to organize and streamline and just get everything under control that doesn't actually have to do with dealing with people. And so from your perspective, what's maybe it is training, maybe it is technology, but what is the biggest challenges working in mental health in 2023, about to be 2024? I'm curious
Yeah.
your thoughts.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So a lot of the pain that our customers face on a daily basis is clinician burnout and not enough hours in the day to do their job well, and so that's where one suite of tools that we have is all about saving them time. So leaning into AI assisted technologies to help them do documentation and do some of the case management stuff in an automated way that just hopefully gives them back hours in their day that can either be used for their core line of work and helping people, or can be used to recharge themselves. So really one of the biggest just administrative burdens of running any kind of healthcare practice, especially mental health care, is doing the documentation needed to get reimbursed by insurance. And so we have a suite of tools that can record the session and then help them more expediently generate the kind of documentation that's needed from what's happening there. And the second suite of tools that we have is all around using data to help inform treatment decisions. So there's a whole discipline around evidence-based care in the mental health space, and there's just a ton of research that shows that when you're collecting data from your clients, during treatment and using that data to help treatment decisions, that outcomes are better, and folks see improvement in their symptoms faster. But again, as you just said, Jordan, there's been a lack of focus on tools for clinicians to help do that, and so we have again another line of products and features around making sure that the right kind of assessments can be administered to clients during treatment, and then that data then flows into our system and acts as an assistant to the clinician to help them use that when they're making choosing interventions within treatment or how to continue care.
Just Roger, with your product, like what type of practice do you target? Are your customers like sole practitioner clinicians, or are they up through much larger groups? Or I'm curious who you target with that platform.
Yeah, for sure. No, that's a great question, and I'm very happy to say it's kind of all of them. So we definitely have an offering that a solo practitioner can show up at Blueprint and sign up and get using the product right away, and can kind of run their own kind of run their own journey that way. We do have a very strong cohort of customers that are in that kind of like mid-size group practice kind of range, and then also we have some large organizations that either have kind of a regional network of providers, or that maybe have contract clinicians under their umbrella. Maybe they're a company that is doing their own kind of tech-enabled platform in the space, and they have clinicians that are part of that platform that they're using Blueprint to integrate with and augment what they're doing. So we really have it's a really nice kind of portfolio of all the way from single clinicians to up to groups that have like 1,000 clinicians.
That's really interesting. Yeah, the broad spectrum of value. And I think it's one thing to put together solutions for larger organizations. So if you talk about an organization that has 1,000 clinicians in it, they have technology resources and they have technology leaders, and they can make an assessment and make decisions about and do a proper selection process on what to as far as what their needs and what type of solutions. And they don't, and often it may not be a single solution, and may multiple. But what I think is really interesting, and I see this pattern repeated, and some of this I've seen it repeated in this, knowing and having worked with clients in this space before, at various sizes, that it's very challenging, because especially the smaller you get, there are people focused on this, whether they're in mental health or they're more traditional medical practitioners or anything adjacent. They've often invested a tremendous amount of time in learning that industry, and they tend to be often, let's just fair to say, less knowledgeable about technology. They're not naturally technologists like some of us are that say come through engineering backgrounds. So I think it's really interesting because that to me is a unique business problem, where they're actually the group that most need solutions, technology solutions, because especially the smaller practices, smaller organizations, but they're actually the least equipped to properly select the right solutions.
I feel like maybe have you been like listening in on some of our recent like leadership team conversations, because that is 100% the case, is that when we're working with a larger org, typically they've got a group that knows how to integrate with APIs. Blueprint has an API. We've got a few different integration patterns we can employ, and those sort of ironically, obviously with any large organization, there's always integration is always a unique journey to get to be successful, but a lot of times those are a little bit easier to work with, because everybody on both sides kind of knows the patterns and knows the role, but it's those practices that they started out smaller, they've been able to grow their business, which is great. Now they're so focused on growing their clinician business and keeping their clinicians happy and just being a good business owner, that leaning into learning about healthcare integration technology is like so far down on their list that we really need to kind of bring our A game to help them through that and try to make Blueprint as accessible and helpful as possible, because they've got so many other things that they're trying to deal with.
That's great. Yeah, and the reason I wasn't in those meetings, I wasn't I wasn't tracking those, but it's this problem is just, I've seen this applied so many times in the greater business space. It's like especially working a lot with like mid-market and enterprise, like a broad spectrum. This is the problem I keep seeing in the space, and we talk a lot about it at Celigo, because we are an integration and automation company, and we feel like, okay, we're a foundational component for digital transformation, and yet some of the organizations that need it most are the less equipped to take advantage of it. And so it's this really interesting dichotomy where we have often working with groups that they have a team, they're capable, they were coming in, I think of it as like working with a crew of experienced professional contractors, and then you've got these other ones where it's almost like it's someone trying to do it themselves, and yet they've never framed anything before, and they're trying to build a a three-story deck,
Right.
cantilevered over a cliff, because if it fails, it can often mean their business. So it's really interesting, and I think this is what you guys are solving in healthcare actually really represents a greater problem in business right now, is like how to leverage these tools, how to take more advantage of modern products, AI being one of them. But how can you do that when you don't really have the skill set to vet those and make those decisions on your own? How does it get packaged together?
Right.
Yeah.
Is there anything that, I mean, and is there any, like, I don't know, nuggets you've learned in that process that's helpful for those kind of, mid-market kind of customers in that situation?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really, the way I frame it up often is thinking about it in terms of smaller organizations are always focused on, they really need business solutions. And so those of us that are providers of solutions, you're often thinking about it in terms of technology, and you kind of make these assumptions, and you can almost get a little bit of tunnel vision and because when you work with the larger ones, they're more capable. So you're dealing with other technologists there. So you're talking at like you said, an API to API platform level, which they can bridge that gap from that technical conversation to solving the business problem and getting the business solution. And they're really architecting the business solution themselves, versus as you get smaller and smaller, it needs to be a more and more packaged true business solution. And it's that abstraction. You mentioned that concept of abstraction, and that's exactly it. It has to be much, much more abstracted. And even though it could be the same thing, you could actually be selling the same exact product, but it's going to be used differently. And so you're, depending on your audience there and their sophistication, the level of it. And I think keeping that in mind has always been really helpful in this, like, even in just trying to understand requirements or how to make, like, really, and often more importantly, how to make them successful with a product.
For sure.
Really, regardless of what it is.
I think you touched on that a lot, Mark, but I'm kind of curious, Roger. I'll kind of reframe. We're talking a lot about framing today, but I'll reframe your question, Mark, or excuse me, your question, Roger, and turn it back around to you. But, like, how do you personally, like, what is your strategy for building technology for the, I guess, technologically challenged, technologically inexperienced, for those, like, smaller practices? What's going through your head when you're saying, okay, we have a new release, we have a new product, specific rollout. How are you building technology for those that aren't as technologically inclined?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, in my experience, nothing beats trying to have as clear of a persona in mind as to who you're building for, and trying to, as part of developing that persona, just thinking about their priorities, and just in their daily job, like, where do they going to spend the most of their time, all the way down to things that they are not interested in at all, and just as as kind of a specific example from the lens of a software engineer who's now in management, like, it's easy and tempting, if there's some kind of bit of the workflow that's not working, and for someone who understands the product really well to say, oh well, like, yeah, we can't automatically detect that bit of data for some technical reason. The workaround is to have them go in and flip this other switch and type this other thing in, and then now everything will work fine. And as an engineer, like, that's a really satisfying sort of answer, because, like, oh, we've solved the problem, we've made it work, and we don't have to maybe incur these other side effects that we didn't want to deal with. But you have to remember that in the shoes of the person who's using your product, like, they've bought it to save them time. They bought it to do something for them. And so if you tell them, well, actually, to accomplish this thing you want, here's 3 other steps you got to do, like, it's not a very satisfying. It's not a very satisfying answer from the customer's perspective, And so that's just something, and again, we live in a world of scarce resources, and there's lots of demands on my team. And so, we're always asked to figure something else out, which, engineers are problem solvers, and we love to do that. But I even need to, to kind of remind myself of that mindset when those things kind of pop up. It's like, hey, look, like, they didn't buy this product to do extra work so that it will work. They bought this product to save time and to get some result. And, how to manipulate Blueprint so that it works is like way down on their low priority list, So if you can kind of just hold that in your head while you're designing solutions and fixing bugs and all the other stuff that comes with delivering a product, like, I just think that's a really valuable lesson to keep top of mind.
It's cool to hear a customer first perspective from a vice president of engineering. And I don't think that perspective, I know it's in your head all the time, but it's not often vocalized. And so it's very, it's just really cool to hear that you're focused on, the actual, like the person literally using the software. And I know that's literally what you get paid to do, but you just don't hear it that often. But anyway, Mark, it looked like you were cooking up a question. Sorry if you were.
I mean, I'm always cooking up a question. No, go ahead, Jordan. I don't want. I've got one I'll save for a little bit later. I don't want to derail the conversation right now.
So. Sure. So, doing a little deep dive on Blueprint, something that I thought was pretty interesting was the fact that you guys list integrations. Obviously, Celigo, we're an iPaaS integration focused company. We live and breathe integrations. We have API connections to 250 different apps with data flowing between them for thousands of companies every single day. It seems like the majority of integrations at Blueprint have to do with EHR. For those listening, that's electronic health records, which of course I knew before this conversation, but I just wanted to make it clear to our listeners. How do you guys handle integrations? What is a mental health a mental health company like Blueprint? Like, what do they care about integrations? How do integrations get built? I'm very aware of how they work in e-commerce. I know Mark has like 1,000 times my knowledge in that space, but in your brand of work, how do integrations happen? Like, just kind of give us a breakdown on the integrations at Blueprint.
Yeah, sure. So, healthcare integrations is a topic that, many people way smarter than me could spend years talking about. So, we don't need to, I won't even try to go real deep on that. But, at the highest level, EHR systems or EMR systems, they exist to hold kind of like the clinical record of the patient, and really, oftentimes the main kind of driver of that is so that you have the right kind of data around, a person's conditions and the procedures that were taken and their diagnosis, so that you can then properly, submit claims to insurance and payers and get reimbursed. And so EHRs tend to have this kind of mix of some diagnostic information as well as then the information needed, for getting paid by a payer. And so, in Blueprint's world, we view ourselves as a complement to that system. We're not a replacement for that system. And there's lots of, kind of regulatory and other, overhead that comes with being like the system of record for that information. But, to do Blueprint's job, we need to have information about the client. Typically in the EHR terms, it's called a patient. In mental health, typically use the term client. So we need to have, the information about who this person is and their age and their gender and how to contact them and things like that. And then what Blueprint does really well is we have this great engine for, delivering the mental health care experience. So what needs to happen in between treatment, what kinds of, homework or check-ins or things clients should be doing between their visits with their provider, when the provider is wanting to measure their symptoms and their symptom response, like what kind of instruments, assessments are used to measure that. And then once all that data flows in, then now we have this real picture of the client's mental health journey and what things have been done in treatment, and then how those things then affect, their outcomes. So we kind of sit, next to the EHR, but that means we need to get patient information in, to the EHR. And then usually once we've done our thing and we have this kind of record of what the client has done and, in concert with the clinician and the Blueprint platform, some of that needs to flow back into the EHR for documentation purposes. So So if someone, completes an assessment to measure their depression symptoms, obviously we need to know who that person is. So the patients flow in to Blueprint. Once they've done that, that will then, the result of that assessment will then flow back into the EHR, and then that may be used, downstream in later processes for, billing or et cetera. So really it's, at the highest level, it's getting patient information in, it's sending, assessment data back in. There's, a million other different nuances there where ideally someone is being reminded to take these assessments near their appointment, so that way you can walk into your appointment and see your provider, and their provider has a fresh set of data to look at and review with you and talk about. So, being able to have visibility into the appointment schedule, so we can make sure the client has been completing, the instruments, ahead of time, that's another piece of it. So really in all cases, that's the flow of the data. From a technical perspective, there's as many ways to do it as you can think of. I like to tell my team that, CSVs and SFTP still rule the world, despite, everybody's best efforts to make things that are more elegant, securely delivering flat files back and forth is still a prime example. We do have a more modern API, and we love to work with partners that can call our APIs, and we have APIs for them to call. So that's kind of our preferred, pattern. Luckily, there is a lot of innovation in the mental health care space today. So there are a lot of tech company, kind of tech forward companies that are speaking APIs. And there's just a ton of kind of historical healthcare standards, FHIR and HL7 and all that are still in play. So, so we, again, to the point of like, how do we make this a business solution that's accessible? Like, we try to speak as many languages as we can, again, we can't do everything perfectly all the time, but we try to be as accommodating as possible and meet the customer where they are with whatever technology they have. So.
Thank you. Appreciate that, man.
Roger, one thing kind of related to this, you talk about the data that you're moving back and forth, and obviously this is highly sensitive information, and moving that, so security and compliance are the utmost concerns. And there was something early in our discussion here where you mentioned, one of the services you provide is generating notes. So recording the sessions and generating notes, and instantly kind of my mind's, like, okay, how are you doing this? Oh, I bet you've got using a large language model, and you're likely, and so I'm curious about your experience with AI, and if you're doing it with some other way, that'd be very interesting. But assuming you're doing something to automated AI models to translate this data, I'm curious how you're doing that and addressing some of the security concern, the security and compliance concerns that are really like kind of at the forefront of some of these new technologies, and how you weigh out, okay, what new technologies you bring in versus, what models you build in-house versus what you can take outside, and those kind of things.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. That's a great question. And obviously, security is 100% top of mind for us. It's a critical aspect for our customers. We would not be in business if we didn't have, rock solid security and compliance. And so that's, again, that's probably one of the top aspects of my role, or my job in this role is to make sure that we're solid there. So yeah, we follow all the HIPAA recommended regulations. We are SOC 2 type 2 compliant, just from a overall, kind of compliance perspective. And really our approach is we run in a cloud infrastructure platform, like most modern tech companies do. We take great care to make sure that only the right, folks on staff for their job function have access to the right pieces of that infrastructure. But really, when it comes to the sensitive data, our approach is to never retain anything longer than we need to. So when it comes to, a session recording and a transcript, like, we take those, we move those on to the next stage in our pipeline. And then when that stage is completed, we delete, recording the transcript. So we never keep anything longer than we have to. And then we make sure that all of the PHI stays within our HIPAA compliant infrastructure. So certainly, again, like most modern software companies, we have a number of third-party services that we use for various things that are outside our infrastructure, but we make sure that everything that has, customers' health information stays within our compliant infrastructure. And if we do need to, use a third-party service for something that we've redacted or we've, truncated or whatever we've done to make sure that we're not sending any sensitive information in that, So again, it's definitely it's an exciting new frontier. It's a little bit scary. It's definitely a challenge, and our customers are really anxious for some of these solutions, but they're also very concerned about the privacy and so we're, again, just trying to be very thoughtful, intentional, and we are learning with the rest of the industry, like, kind of what are the what are the critical pieces here. But
so
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So with that in mind, obviously security is incredibly important, but what is next for the Blueprint platform technologically? Will it be alternate types of inclusion of AI technology? Are there new product releases coming? What can you tell the listeners about what's next for Blueprint as a platform technologically?
Yeah, so I think all those things, not to cop out and sidestep, but we know there's tremendous opportunities to use AI in terms of saving clinicians time, in terms of augmenting their decision making capabilities. AI is never going to replace the human touch of a therapist that understands you and knows your history and your story. And so, that's definitely not, that's not the goal, but certainly there's a lot of things that happen in running any kind of business that AI can be a great benefit for. So we know there's a long road ahead in helping folks, save time. We also know there's a lot of opportunities for, maybe even more kind of more traditional, data science techniques. And just, we're building a very impressive data set of mental health outcomes in our platform. And we believe that data is going to be really powerful to be able to help, provide insight on what kinds of approaches work and what kinds of, ways do you get to a better outcome, and so building more of that knowledge into the product as our data set, continues to mature, and us, we build more, products and tools, kind of on top of that data. And then, again, you can't undersell just making a great experience that both clinicians and clients will love. We have mobile apps and the ability to send, to engage clients via text, via email, via our mobile app. And there's a very common kind of ask from clients is, hey, look, I've been seeing this person and it didn't work. And so I saw another person that didn't work. And then I saw another person and it finally worked. And so, people who are seeking treatment, like they want to know like how they're doing. They want to get better. And they want to find the right person that's going to help them do that, And so being able to guide them along the path of like, hey, this person might be the right fit for you. And then also, while they're in treatment, being able to, give them the kind of reinforcement that actually helps their in treatment get better is a very powerful, thing to be able to do.
Thank you. Appreciate that, man.
So a key thing there jumped out, Roger, and it almost kind of like connecting some of the dots here. One of the, like, you're actually able to, Blueprint's able to provide a broader value to the mental health community, just from a standpoint of facilitating better matchmaking between clients and clinicians that have better outcomes, which ultimately, if you're successful, that alleviates some of the shortage of clinicians that are out there. If you got more people working with the right person, getting to a better outcome, that creates a more efficient system essentially, and helps alleviate some of the pent up demand that we're seeing in that space, right?
Yeah. That's exactly right. There's such a the supply, or the demand has outstripped the supply, and so something needs to happen in the marketplace to rationalize that, and obviously there could be a whole lot more supply, but making the delivery of care more efficient is a huge opportunity.
That's really cool.
Do you feel that there might be, like, obviously you guys are a company with your own product, but that capability to match the right person with the right clinician, do you or does Blueprint plan on expanding that capability, or, like, I don't know if licensing or white labeling that capability to other brands in the healthcare space? Is that something that's on the table?
Yeah, I'm not going to speak too much about kind of something that doesn't exist yet in terms of our product plans, but we definitely, we definitely know there's a real need there. We definitely know that that would be a valuable offering to have, and so I think there's a lot of possibilities that emerge, just from having something that can really provably get people healthier faster, but job one right now is we're just focused on building a great product that clinicians want to use and that clients want to use, and making sure that that we can help people deliver great care.
That's awesome. Thank you for diplomatically answering that.
Yeah, let's just ask you to dish out your entire go-to-market strategy.
I'm thinking ahead. Well, we're getting relatively close to the end of our recording session, and I want to make sure that both Mark has enough time to ask any remaining questions. I have just a few that I want to wrap up with. Let me just ask you this, because this is something that we sometimes ask our guests, and it's not particularly related to anything we've talked about. But you mentioned, when you kind of talked about your journey to becoming a vice president of engineering, Roger, is that you'd been in a coding or an engineering capacity, but before that, maybe 10, 15-year-old Roger, what really got you interested in software and engineering? Was there any particular event or product that came out that you just loved and kind of kickstarted that for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually grew up on a dairy farm. So 15-year-old Roger was milking cows and baling hay in the summers and getting up pretty early, and I think I knew about that age that probably a career in farming wasn't the most likely path for me, and my parents were 100% very supportive and encouraged me to pursue whatever career felt right, and they actually sent me to computer camp when I was probably in like 5th grade, and I think we ended up spending a lot of time formatting floppy disks at the time, and doing some very basic programming in the basic programming language, and so I had some exposure to computers kind of along the way there. But really, I had the good fortune, just in terms of the timeline of the Earth, to be joining college about the time that the World Wide Web was coming of age, and so just seeing that thing kind of go from not existing to all of a sudden everywhere in the span of a couple years, while I had a chance to really like shape my career and try things out and just be so it's a little bit older than 15, but but that was really a formative moment, because when I first entered college, I didn't really have I wasn't like, oh, VP of engineering, and that's what I got to be. Like, I didn't really know. I was roughly interested in studying business, but once I got into college and as the web emerged, like, then it really started to kind of like click together for me that, I kind of like computers, and this seems like a really kind of world-changing opportunity, and turns out that it was. So
that's awesome. It's cool to hear how just like a small event like computer camp, when you're young, can really lead to something like that. I recently, I'll do a quick story just because I found this pretty interesting, but I used to babysit for a kid when I was probably 15 or 16, and I remember one day he showed me a computer game that he had made. It was not a very good computer game, but he had made it. He was like 7 or 8 years old, and with the help of his dad. And I babysat him, and I haven't thought about that family for maybe 15 years. And just recently, I found out that the dad who helped him make that computer game is the founder of Siri, who sold Siri to Apple, the founder of Change.org, who is one of the biggest change petition organizations in the world. And now he is the VP of AI experience at Airbnb, and recently sold a company to Airbnb. And I think his son is doing something in the engineering field. I would assume so. And it could have been just from him making that video game with his son, whether it's you going to computer camp, but there's just those like little events that can be so incredibly formative. And it's always interesting to hear people. Mark and I have heard a lot of people say, oh, the first computer I got was a Commodore 64, or, for some reason that always comes up. I guess a lot of people had Commodore 64s, but whatever, it doesn't really matter what it was, but it's just cool that something so small can become so transformative in life. With that in mind, we are closing in, like I said, and I apologize for that little detour. But before I ask my kind of wrap up, finalized questions, Mark, I'm curious if you had anything on your plate that you wanted to ask Roger before we.
Maybe one thing. So, Roger, I saw that you were Indiana Business Journal Tech Executive of the Year. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Congratulations. That's really awesome. And that made me think about a couple things. And one is the sort of the somewhat, I almost think of it as a little bit of the uniqueness of being a tech leader in Indiana. And people can be very coast-centric in a sort of way around tech, or we have these tech hubs in the country. And whether you're in the Bay Area or Seattle or Austin or Boston, thinking like, okay, well, outside of that, the innovation isn't happening maybe. And that's really, and that's wrong very much of the time. And I know, at Celigo, we opened an office in Indiana and just have a great group of employees there and see this. And I'm just curious, like a little bit on your perspective of Indiana, either as a tech hub, or what that's like and what that experience is, probably building an engineering team there in that area, and how what your take on that is.
Yeah, sure. Well, so I was born and raised in northern Indiana. I went to Indiana University. I started my career in Chicago and spent some time there, but then, moved to Indy going on 20 years ago. And so Indy is my, adopted home, and it's my community. And the award you mentioned was for sure a career highlight for me, to be recognized by this community that I've, spent a lot of time, in and poured love into. And so that was, for sure, just something really awesome, and very proud of that. And so, I think one thing that's really great about being in a small community like this is that it is a very supportive and a very self-reinforcing, community. I think we're all self-aware here in Indianapolis that, we're not the biggest pond, and there's not as much capital flows here, but we have a bunch of talented folks, and we all this is our home, and we want to live here and work here and make it a great place to live and work. And so everyone is very much a cheerleader for each other, and very much as a advocate for other companies in the in the area. And it's a place that really celebrates successes and wins. So in the past 10 years or so, we've had a couple of, really major exits. Exact Target was a great company here that was acquired by Salesforce for a couple billion. And Angie's List was a great company that joined IAC, there's a longer list of smaller ones, So the successes that have happened here, like everyone really celebrates, so I think that's I think that's my favorite part of it is just being in a small group where everybody kind of knows everyone, but just really supportive of one another.
That's really cool. That the supportive community nature of it. That's awesome. That's that's a huge thing right there.
Roger, Mark just sent me a Slack that said he's moving to Indiana so he can win the award next year.
Well, then Well, we would love to have you, and I'll be happy to nominate you.
Well, no, and it's funny. We have one of our, I guess, companies that's either a partner or closely associated with us is called TechPoint, and they're in Indiana.
Yep.
And just the camaraderie that I see between them and other Indiana-based tech companies it's exactly what you said. It's very supportive. It's very inclusive, and it's really important for places that don't have the kind of swinging power of Silicon Valley or Boston or something like that. So I do want to wrap up with one question, just to make sure the listeners can get to know you a little bit more outside of the technology world. And this is the question that I always ask, but outside of work, Roger, what are and I know you told me earlier, one of your passions, hobbies, or interests is cooking Thanksgiving dinner. But besides that, what are your passions, hobbies, and interests outside of work?
Yeah, for sure. No, I do love to cook. And I think kind of adjacent to that is love to travel. So just recently returned from a trip to Italy, which was kind of my wife and I's first major trip since before the pandemic. But had been, had the good fortune to go all over the world and, climb Kilimanjaro and drive around Iceland and places like that. So I think, seeing the world is for sure my top hobby. But then, a little closer to home, I love to cook. I love to eat. And, I've got two daughters, one who is at Indiana University and another who is a junior in high school right now. So, certainly movie nights with the family and, seeing them grow up and thrive is also a full-time job.
Awesome. Well, whether you're dealing with daughters or kids in general or cooking, it sounds like you have a full plate. All right. On that fantastic joke, I just wanted to wrap up this Technology Leadership Podcast. Thank you to those listening. Roger, really appreciate you being here representing Blueprint. Mark, as always, you've been a fantastic co-host. And stick around, everybody. We'll be back in about a week or two with our next episode. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Roger.